Welcome to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking about literacy as equity with Krista Gauthier, who is the founder and director of Sliding Doors. Thank you so much for being here, Krista.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to talk to you, Catherine.
Well, and we have spoken before, so people who have watched Your Need to Know may remember that you and I spoke on that show in July of 2018 and on Inside Scoop in February of 2019 as you launched the Dyslexic Edge Conference at George Mason University. So you have you've done so much in a short amount of time, or it seems like a short amount of time to me. Maybe it doesn't seem that way to you. But raising the disparities in the children who receive services when they have dyslexia has been uneven at best. In this climate where we're talking about education and equity and how it is so difficult to access the system for many families and their children, you really have sort of brought to my attention that literacy is the foundation, an important piece of equity. And so let's talk a little bit, I guess, first about your journey to having started Sliding Doors.
Sure. So this all started because probably about 5-6 years ago when my daughter, who's now a rising 8th grader, started to struggle with reading. And having been a teacher in the past and having been someone who excelled in school, I really didn't know what was going on, and I didn't understand it. And so we soon discovered that she has dyslexia, and we started down this, as any parent will tell you, it's an interesting, rocky path. But one of the things that really struck us when we took that journey was that two major things. One is as you mentioned, the access that these kids have to the help they need is very expensive and very hard to get. And the second thing we realized, both through interacting with our daughter and through research, was that a lot of these kids are very gifted in the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. And so we had kind of a light bulb moment of thinking about all the articles and stories you hear about, people can't find engineers and scientists. And we started to feel like, well, maybe they can't because the very kids who would fill those roles never get there because they don't get what they need. So we wanted to create something that made the kind of help they need accessible, but also played on their strengths. So we have both reading tutoring and STEM enrichment in what we do.
So Fairfax County Public Schools is a huge school system, and it's the 10th largest in the nation. And with a school system that big, there's many, many layers that you may not find if you're in a smaller school system where there's fewer layers between a parent and available resources. My children are in their 30s now, so when my son was not reading, and as a parent, I think we need to emphasize that nobody really gets a handbook, period, when you have a child. But certainly if you suspect that your child has learning differences, it's hard to know other than talking with the teacher proceed and getting your child services, especially when you have classroom teachers who are telling you, well, they're still on the curve, or no, they learn at different speeds, and all of these things that are kind of like pushing back against what you know as a parent. And so in Fairfax County, and my children went through Fairfax County Public Schools, what I have found is the frustration that parents feel in being advocates for their children is very real. And so you have managed to do something kind of outside the system with your after-school program. So tell us about your workaround.
Right. So it is a workaround. We pride ourselves on being a market disruptor. And the reason is because, well, there's a few things that we wanted to address with the program we started. One is, as you mentioned, the advocacy piece. And it is very tough, even if you have all the background and all the means and all the information as a parent, to truly get what your child needs through the school system. The school system tends to rely on a waiting to fail model. So as parents watch their child fall farther and farther behind, they're often told, well, but they're doing okay in this or okay in that. And so just the ability or the access to testing and getting these students what they need is very, very difficult. So we wanted to create a program where parents did not have to rely on that system to get the help that they need. So in our program, we actually don't require a diagnosis of dyslexia. We make sure we evaluate all of our students first. So we make sure that the type of curriculum we use would help and benefit them in their reading. But we didn't want to require the diagnosis. And, I'll use our journey as an example of that. We knew as early as first grade that this was the challenge. And we did not get an official diagnosis until she was in 5th grade, and that was only because we paid for it. So, and that did not come from Fairfax County schools.
And so this brings us full circle back to the issue of equity. In a school system that's so large, and there are 46 Title I elementary schools in Fairfax County right now, I remember that they only got a specialist with experience in dyslexia after major advocacy work was done by Decoding Dyslexia Virginia. And I want to say, I can't even remember what year that was, maybe 2015?
I believe it was 2016, yeah.
2016. I mean, but it was like, how can a school system so large not have somebody who's a specialist when you figure with so many thousands of children, a certain percentage of the population is dyslexic?
Right. I mean, so when you think about Fairfax County schools, I mean, there's currently about 189,000 students in Fairfax County. The percentage is about 20% of the population is dyslexic. So that, translates to roughly about, 27 to 30,000 kids in the school system have dyslexia. And when you think about the fact that there is one person who, by the way, huge amount of respect for the dyslexia specialist Fairfax County. She is doing amazing work, but it's one person for that many people, that many schools, and so what ends up happening is, you were talking about this idea of literacy as equity. What happens is that the people who can afford it, the people who have the time and the bandwidth and the background and everything can manage to get their child what they need outside the system. They don't have to rely on the system. And so even with Fairfax County moving towards, a better way of helping these kids, the 10th largest school system in the country is like an aircraft carrier. It's going to take them a decade to change. And so we wanted to create something that we call like the speedboat that gets in there now and makes this very necessary intervention accessible to kids who need it.
For those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and I'm talking with Krista Gauthier, who is the founder and director of Sliding Doors. And we are talking about literacy as equity, particularly applied to children who need special services. So when we talk about the parents who know how to access resources or who to contact, we're talking about, out of 46 Title I schools, a population of students whose parents don't know how to access the system, don't understand assessments their child is getting, don't have the time, don't understand how the system works, they don't speak the language. And so that's very real in Fairfax County. And so when we talk about, the gap, the achievement gap among our student population, we really have to carve out, are we meeting the testing and assessment and evaluation needs early on? Because as you said, with the wait to fail model, these students get behind, and it's not just a matter of not being able to catch up academically, it does something to their self-esteem. And I have witnessed that in my own home, what it does to kids.
Right, and so you mentioned something interesting about the waiting to fail model and the confidence and the self-esteem piece. One of the things, there's a lot of myths out there about when is the most effective time to test. You hear a lot of things about you have to wait till they're older to evaluate for dyslexia. The truth of the matter is you can evaluate as young as 5 years old. And actually kind of the irony is that I think a lot of what the school system's trying to do, if I can make this claim, is that money drives a lot of what goes on. And so, the the irony to this is that if they tested them at 5, right, intervention that's required is only about, 30 minutes a few times a week. If you wait all the way to 4th grade, they need like hours every day of intervention just to make up the gap. And so the cost of the actual intervention goes up exponentially when you wait. So there's sort of a little irony to that, actually.
There is, and I know that a lot of advocacy work has been done in Richmond to pass legislation and to fund for schools to do universal testing and to do it earlier.
Right.
But, budgets for school systems, I mean, they do get money from the state, but there's a huge variance in the 134 school districts just within the Commonwealth of Virginia in what they're able to provide and the resources that they have. But I think from the perspective of the general public, what we need to talk about, think about, and do something about is when we talk about equity, and certainly that's on everybody's mind right now, it's like, what can people advocate for? How to be a citizen advocate or a disruptor to say that more resources need to be given to this, because kids end up in a much tougher situation when they are on a track where they're not successful, where they're frustrated, where they feel that they're not smart, or they're told that they're not smart, and that builds and sort of seeps into every other aspect of their school experience, which creates an unequal school experience for these children as well.
Right, and so, what's interesting is, as most of us fall on a sort of a bell curve, people with dyslexia tend to fall on a barbell, right? So you have these amazing statistics of, 40% of entrepreneurs, 40% of engineers, self-made millionaires are dyslexic. But then you've got 48% of the prison population is dyslexic. And these are people who generally are extremely talented and gifted, and we are all paying a price for the fact that they don't get what they need early on, and their confidence, and like you said, it seeps into everything they do in schools. And so the way we look at this and the way we're trying to solve this problem is, like you mentioned, we're trying to go outside the system. And we've created a network of partners, universities, companies, and other nonprofit organizations who we're trying to create what we're calling the Dyslexic Edge Academy, where we can provide these services at no charge to kids who are on free and reduced lunch, and at no expense to the school system either, right? And so we're trying to unite interested parties. So when we talk to a company, for example, they recognize that these kids are their future workforce, right? The universities recognize that these are the kids that they want in their programs because they represent the future innovators. And in the world of AI, the dyslexic skill set is exactly what we need. And so by uniting sort of these outside groups and basing it on kind of a community school model where we're wrapping our resources around and helping out these kids, we hope to level the playing field.
Joining us. This is Making Change Radio, and I am talking with Krista Gauthier, who is the founder and director of Sliding Doors. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and here on Radio Fairfax, we like to bring you the people who are actually making the change. And this is something that Krista has been working on, but there seems to be a much greater urgency as more of our fellow citizens are recognizing that there are racial components to how people get services, access, educational opportunities. So you mentioned the enormous percentage of the prison population, which is overwhelmingly minority, and the fact that they have, many of them have dyslexia. What did you say, 48%?
48% of the prison population.
Have dyslexia, which is almost half. So data tells us an important thing here. And when you talk about engineers and scientists and entrepreneurs and self-made millionaires, there's also a racial element there. And so I think we as a country, as people who care about education in Fairfax City and Fairfax County and beyond, need to recognize that more effort needs to be put on how we are allowing minority students, the most vulnerable students in the county, access to the services that more affluent, educated parents already know how to get to. So when you talk about the academy, one of your partners, I believe, is Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech, and of course, George Mason University, my alma mater, also a wonderful partner. The College of Science is who you work with on the Dyslexic Edge Conference, which we'll talk about in a bit. But Virginia Tech is interesting because when I first started working with this coalition of parents, Virginia Tech is a very welcoming place for engineering students with dyslexia, which is not something necessarily the average person would even know, that a school has really gone out of their way to say, we recognize the talent, we recognize the challenge, and there's a place for you.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that partnership with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a wonderful lab at the Virginia Tech facility in Falls Church. It's called the Think a Bit Lab. And the person in charge there, Dr. Jim Edgenreiter, and I have known each other for a few years. And a lot of this idea came from conversations he and I had. And the Think a Bit Lab is a wonderful place where, and they do focus a lot on Title I schools and bringing kids in, where they teach them how to code in a very wonderfully creative makerspace atmosphere. And so when Jim and I started talking about this, we just saw it as a great partnership where Sliding Doors can deliver their curriculum and he can do the STEM piece of what we do. So.
And what about the fact that, as you said, money drives all of this. None of this is free, and it's very difficult to make resources available to people who don't have resources. So it seems to me one of the challenges is figuring out how the economic model for creating something like the Academy and creating a 2-year curriculum that you have for your after-school program and how we make it work for the most disadvantaged students who need those services in the county.
Right. So yes, funding is always a key topic in all this. So we're going to do it through a few different mechanisms and different revenue streams. One of which is grants. Jim is in the process of writing some grants for this, and which I think will be extremely helpful. But one of the things too is we really want corporate partners in this, and we're in negotiations with two totally different sizes. One is a startup company, another is a rather large STEM company here in DC, both of whom want to donate significant funds to support this because, as I mentioned, they recognize that that this is their future workforce and they really want to support these children. And our hope is to get more. I mean, the more the merrier. I mean, because for us, it's more than just the funding. I mean, these companies are excited to be letting their employees volunteer and interacting with the kids and inspiring them to do great things. And so the more people we have to support them in this way, it makes me think of one of the things we do is with our program before the current state of COVID, is we used to do Science Saturdays, and we used to go places where the kids could meet different engineers and scientists. And one of the things we took out of that we didn't necessarily anticipate was the confidence boost these kids get seeing these professional people believe in them. And so for us, the corporate partnerships is more than just that funding mechanism. It's also really a key component to the confidence, boosting their confidence, and which for us is an equal skill to teaching them how to read. So we do that. We also will be doing some private fundraising as well. So, but our goal is to have it fully covered.
And that's what I think really is a key component. I know that with a lot of programs that work with older students who I think of Genesis Works that has an internship program for high school students, and Year Up that works with young adults to prepare them with soft skills and hard skills to get career, about the career path. Things like transportation can sometimes be so fundamentally a hurdle to getting kids, even if they had a scholarship and even if the program is there for them. I mean, simply because students have different arrangements. Sometimes their parents are not available to run them around in the minivan. Trying to get the resources to the kids or the kids to the resources, especially in a county that is so incredibly large. I mean, do you have a future vision? I mean, you've done a lot, but I'm sure that, looking down the road, you realize that so much more has to be done to eliminate some of these barriers.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you mentioned transportation, and transportation is actually a line item on our proposed budget because, again, I don't think people understand. Again, it's something where you're in a more privileged position. You take for granted that if your kid has an activity, you just hop in the car and bring them, right? It's not like that for a lot of families here in Fairfax County, and so we will make sure that transportation is not a barrier to what we are doing. But as we move on down the road after the 2-year pilot of the academy, the hope is that it becomes a program that schools adopt, and so that again, transportation isn't an issue, and then the sort of the advantage of what we do is that it's after school, and it doesn't interrupt instruction time during the day or anything like that. So it makes it a pretty ideal intervention for these kids.
For those of you just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight I'm talking with Krista Gauthier, who is the founder and director of Sliding Doors. So going forward, acknowledging the fact that accessing resources is just as important as being able to build the resources, fund the resources, make them readily available. Going back to this piece where we talk about literacy as equity, what is the price we pay when corporations don't understand that you have to grow your own talent? I just saw an alert today that came in through my email that said, because of restrictions on immigration during COVID, suddenly the talent in high-level jobs, engineering, coding, IT, suddenly there's no talent when we close the doors to our country. So is this really a pitch that companies need to understand, that you have to grow it, and then not only grow it, you have to truly be invested in equal opportunity, which means equal access?
Right. I definitely think we're making headway with that, us as an organization, but in general as a society, because what I've seen take place over the past few years is an evolution of thought where I would speak with a company or a university, and they were very proud of a program they'd have for, say, high school students or university students, and they would call it filling the pipeline. And I said, you're not filling anything, you're recruiting at that point, right?
Right.
The people who should be getting to you have already leaked out, right? They're gone. So I have started to see a fundamental shift to understanding that you do have to start in the elementary at the elementary level. And one of the things we're working on with a couple of the companies that are going to support the academy is creating what we're calling the neurodiversity pathway to STEM, right? And basically recognizing that no one organization can do it all, our hope is that we actually create a pathway of organizations that support these students from K to workforce. And so like Sliding Doors sort of represents the foundational piece of that, since we work with elementary students. I actually just spoke with somebody who runs a middle school program for kids with dyslexia to encourage them to pursue STEM. And then these companies we're talking with in the universities are talking about internships and scholarships. So our hope is that they don't just finish Sliding Doors or the Dyslexic Edge Academy and, whoops, well, there's not a next step, right? We want to create a seamless pathway, and we recognize the need for partners to do that.
Wow, I love this concept of K to workforce. Like, put that on a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
Along with literacy as equity, which I also love, because these are simple concepts that people can wrap their arms around. So in The World is Flat, Thomas Friedman, 15 years ago, said that we need to care about the kids taking in middle school, right? Because if they're not signing up for algebra or geometry or the higher maths earlier, then they're kind of falling. You talk about leaking out of the pipeline. They're leaking out of the pipeline because they're not on that STEM pathway in their course selections in high school. And if they don't do that in high school, then they're behind and they don't generally select those courses in college. So
Right.
we do need to care about that. But with STEM, a lot of people, you think about science, technology, engineering, and math. Where's literacy in there? And so fundamentally, we have to come back to STEM still relies on the ability to read.
Right. So there's a couple things with that. So the first thing is when you think about the early elementary grades, it's something like more than double the time is spent on reading versus math and science in those classrooms. So that already works to disadvantage the kids who have some kind of learning difference in reading. And then, as we talked about, that results in a lower self-esteem, and then they lose interest in education in general. So that's a problem in and of itself that would lead them to kind of fall off the pathway. But also, too, and I actually really enjoy talking with teachers about this, is that we tend to put all of these subjects in buckets, and they're not in buckets, right? They're not separate. And when it comes to the dyslexic brain, not only do you need literacy in order to, say, read a scientific textbook, dyslexia does impact the way these kids access information in general. So even if it has nothing to do with their ability to, say, decode a word, maybe they have challenges with working memory or being able to translate their thoughts and put them on paper, which again creates more and more barriers to STEM fields, in addition to literacy. So I think we get a lot of the, oh, great, you've had your kids reading at grade level, there won't be any more challenges, check the box. And really, it will impact them in every subject throughout their schooling. So
you're so right. And we're going to take a break now, Krista. And I'm hoping our listeners will join us when we return, because there's a lot more to cover as we talk about the importance of literacy as equity. So please join us after the break.
Al Cooper, Brooks Williams, Al Stewart, Cheryl Wheeler, Barlow Guthrie, Chris, contemporary singer-songwriter folk artists side by side with long-standing esoteric rock performers. That's what Eclectic Hours is. It's music for baby boomers, music where you gotta listen to the words. Eclectic Hours, Sunday mornings from 10 a.m. to noon. James Taylor, Kate Campbell, Joe Cocker, Livingston Taylor, Lucy.
Free for Me, bringing you musical gems rarely heard on the radio. Hear the White Stripes, St. Vincent, and the Hot Melts. Free for Me, Tuesday at 5 on Radio Fairfax.
Let's go down into the subway station where you hear the strangest things. Every Saturday at 4 o'clock on Night Train Memories, Sounds of the Cities.
To the same old oldies stations, playing the same tracks over and over again? If you want to hear some great 50s music you probably never heard before, come and listen to my show. Colin Davies, the Professor of Rock, here on Thursdays from 4 till 6.
The radio programs aired by FPA reflect the viewpoints of individual producers and do not necessarily represent those of the station, its staff, or supporters.
Welcome to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking about literacy as equity with Krista Gauthier, who is the founder and director of Sliding Doors. Thank you so much for giving us your time tonight, Krista.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we were talking a little bit about, the message to businesses as well as educators that they have to be invested in growing the workforce much earlier than they are. And that while we talk a lot about STEM and there's a lot of focus on STEM, that literacy is still an important component to this. And so while students who have dyslexia seem to kind of disproportionately be gifted in the skill set that helps them to excel in science, technology, engineering, and math, we still can't skip over the early diagnosis and the early remediation at the very youngest ages. And so your program, and you can describe a little bit, how you develop the program, how you train your tutors, what it looks like when students and their families sign up to get this after-school program.
Right. So we went operational in January 2017 with our after school program, which is our core key component. And basically, what we wanted to create with that is a place where students, like I said, not only got the intervention and remediation they needed, but also where they could play on their strengths and learn where they are gifted. So our after school program meets twice a week. And we divide the 90 minutes equally. So for the first 45 minutes, students work one-on-one with one of our tutors in a reading method specifically designed to teach kids who struggle to decode how to read. And the second 45 minutes is dedicated to STEM enrichment. We've done everything from kitchen chemistry to rocketry to the science of music to a space unit to raising butterflies. I mean, we really try to branch out and do a lot of different types of activities. The way we actually we get our tutors, and that's been kind of an interesting journey, both in learning how to recruit tutors and also in the development of our curriculum. When we started this program, Joyce and I, one of the things, Joyce, by the way, Joyce Marianopoulos is my partner and tutoring director. She's phenomenal and the foundation of all we do with our reading program. But one of the things that we noticed was that it was very expensive for tutors to get trained. So we kind of saw this as like a two-pronged problem. So it was not only that students aren't gaining access, but that teachers who wish to become trained in how to help these students were facing thousands of dollars of bills in order to do it. So private companies were, they charge a lot of money for their certification. And so what we wanted to do was develop something that was cost effective for the teachers as well. So basically, we recruit anyone who's interested in learning how to do this. We have parents of dyslexics, we have teachers, we have retirees, people who want to learn how to help these kids. And they go through about 18 hours of classroom training over a 2-year period and about 90 hours of practicum work with their student in our after school program. But what we have done at this point is we've branched out a little bit. So we have about 15 tutors that work for us, and they've branched out to a private network we've created. So parents who are looking just for, say, the reading portion and are looking for a private tutor based on their own schedule is something we can provide as well.
And so I remind people that they go to sdsquared.org, and all of the information about your center, about your after school program, about the upcoming conference, which we'll talk about, and also the fact that you do have this program to train tutors. And I believe that your next cohort is starting in August.
It is. So one of the interesting silver linings to the COVID era is that we moved all of our tutoring online because we wanted to make sure that we continued to help the students that are really desperately needed, especially in this virtual learning environment. And so in doing so, we really became proficient in Zoom. And so we've talked a lot about expanding beyond Northern Virginia. And so this cohort that you mentioned, Catherine, that we're starting in August, the beauty of it is going to be done on Zoom. The training is going to be done on Zoom. And you can be anywhere in the country and do this training. So, and we're really excited to be able to branch out a little bit. And I mean, from the very beginning of this, we've gotten calls from all over the country asking to duplicate what we're doing. So we're happy to start to be moving out of that, and with this new cohort, which begins on August 10th.
And it's a 2-year course, is that correct?
It's a 2-year course. The way we work it is that it's it's 2 years because the curriculum is 2 years, and you're paired with a student for that entire 2-year period to do your 90 hours of practicum work. And so it is, so the way we work it though is that our curriculum is divided into units. And so after unit 1, Joyce evaluates where the tutor is, and if she feels they are ready, they can start taking on private students for income. So one of the things that we like is that we're not saying, you have to wait a full 2 years to be able to, begin your tutoring business. You can start it 10 weeks in. And that seems to appeal to people.
That's a good turnaround time. Well, you have identified something that is definitely a silver lining that nobody expected, which is bringing virtual learning, virtual meetings, virtual everything to where people are, instead of people having to go where the meeting and the resources are. But it's also meant that you can't do your Science Saturdays. Your camp program isn't going to happen this year. I mean, you have a lot of components that are a benefit to do in person as well.
Yes, and so that is something that we hope that in the very near future we could do, but we also recognize that is something that might be on hold for some time. And so one of the things we did in the spring is we did do Science Fridays, where we actually did experiments with the kids via Zoom. And it was actually a lot of fun. We would do building challenges. They would watch, me completely, they completely outshined me. I mean, like there was no contest in these engineering contests. And we had a lot of fun with it. And I'm hoping it will actually be easier come fall to do those. The issue we started running into was no one could go anywhere very easily. So it was hard to come up with challenges and experiments with stuff that I figured they had in their house already. So hopefully with people being able to move a little bit more, we can do some more creative things. For sure.
Well, for those of you who are just joining us, you're listening to Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and I'm talking with Krista Gauthier, who is the founder and director of Sliding Doors, a dyslexia learning center, a curriculum, a tutor training program, and also an important partner in the Dyslexic Edge Conference. And that the first conference was held last year. I was delighted to be asked to host a panel of students, which was very enlightening, I think, for everybody sitting in the room. So the conference, which was slated to be in March of this year, didn't happen in March because everything closed down. So tell us a little bit about what it's going to look like this year.
So as most everything right now, it's going to go virtual. And as much as, that wasn't our vision originally for it, and certainly we will be moving back to in-person when we can. The thing that we're actually excited about is the reach, because now that we've gone virtual, we can have a nationwide reach with this. And so I'll talk a little bit about the virtual in a minute, but just to give people a sense of Dyslexic Edge, just like our program, what we wanted to do was create a different sort of conference. Where we not only talk about dyslexia and reading intervention and identifying for dyslexia, we wanted to branch out. We wanted to get out of the echo chamber. And so we wanted to bring together families and educators and industry to have detailed conversations about, STEM education, about what dyslexia looks like in the workforce or the workplace, how do you intervene effectively for dyslexia? And so we wanted to reimagine, the conferences around dyslexia. And one of the things that we do with the conference, and again, so we're going to be creative with this in the virtual space, but we do also do a STEM festival. as part of it, as a way to, again, give kids access and a way to showcase their strengths and to be an active voice and member of this community. So as I mentioned, this year it is going virtual. The way we're working it, we're having all of our wonderful speakers back, including our keynote speaker, Cliff Weitzman, who is a really talented entrepreneur, dyslexic entrepreneur who invented something called Speechify. So everybody's back, which is great. We will do kind of a week-long event. The main event will still be October 17th, where we will have 5 different live sessions, including a Q&A with some really amazing experts, where our audience can interact. But also the week leading up, we will do we will release a lot of wonderful archived presentations from our speakers. And we will still have the STEM component. So one of our partners is the Children's Science Center of Northern Virginia. They'll be doing something with us that day. For people who are attending virtually, we'll be sending out a little something, maybe a little spaghetti and marshmallow tower challenge that we can invite our audience to do and tag us on social media. So we're still forming that, but we're excited to engage in that way.
Well, I'm excited because hopefully, without having to physically drive someplace and be there all day, there'll be new families and people who have not heard about the Dyslexic Edge Conference up to this point, have not heard about Sliding Doors up to this point, people who will make time, since we're all stuck at home, make time to actually tune in and see what this is all about. I'm going to be moderating the panel with the students, and this year we're doing a panel with parents, because what came out of that student panel last year was parents were like, yes, but we need to hear from other parents. How do you help your children? I mean, the children are describing the challenges and how they're coping in class, and they're amazing. They talk about how they advocate for themselves and, what their experience has been. But, you've got a lot of parents sitting out there listening to their experiences, and they're like, yes, but now what do I do? Because I'm brand new to this. And there's no playbook for being an advocate for your child. And truly, there isn't a playbook, although your program, this conference, so many of these things are really helping to create a roadmap for parents, and also a toolkit too. So this is how you try to work with your child's school and teacher and resource specialists. And then over here, the things outside the school that you have access to, because you want to do something more, especially if you really are frustrated by the fact that you just don't think what's being provided is meeting needs. And I think this conference does all of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, and that's kind of what we wanted to achieve. I mean, in kind of doing, a quick search of, conferences on dyslexia, you look through the catalog and you don't see a whole lot about their strengths or where they excel, or, opportunities for children to voice their opinions and their experiences. And so that's, we wanted to bring all of the interested parties together and like you said, create these pathways and these toolkits, especially for parents. It is, I tell parents, I mean, I think I did not come into this knowing what I know now as I sit here, right? I mean, I was so new to this when we started this journey, and it is overwhelming to try to figure out the best pathway. And it's one of the things that we try to do is provide that to parents, resources, experts, people that they can really talk to and find their own way through this.
I think it's important too, when you've had a child that has struggled, and there's no answers. And I certainly walked that path back in the mid 1990s. The fact that you can't do anything to make it better is very disheartening, very demoralizing for parents to watch their child struggle day after day after day in the classroom. And there's nothing you can, there's just, you feel frustrated by the fact that you cannot make it better, which is, all of us want to do that, is to make it better for our kids. And that's why I feel like when we talk about this equity piece, is that it does something to self-esteem. And it's just not just, the test scores. It's not just, the grade level skill set that we talk about. It's the wait to fail model, and kids who get sidelined or whose needs are not adequately met suffer in a way that is very difficult to repair. It just is. And I don't think we talk enough about the fact that education, we started to talk more about the social emotional needs of young children, and how curriculum needs to understand the social emotional needs of young children. But part of that is having a child with a learning difference who cannot get the resources and help they need, and what it does to them socially and emotionally.
Right. And the tough part about, where kids with dyslexia really struggle is that generally speaking, they have above average intelligence, right? So they know very early on that something is different. And so they struggle with that because, in the waiting to fail model, they keep being told, no, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, because a lot of times their intelligence allows them to compensate in a way that masks the true challenges. And so that constant eroding of self-esteem, because they are so smart and they are never allowed to showcase that, really can have some pretty lasting damage.
So for those of you who are just joining us, this is Making Change Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is Krista Gauthier, who is the founder and director of Sliding Doors, a STEM and dyslexia learning center and a program and an ideal, I would say. And it's always great to have you here because you have such great ideas and you just keep pressing forward. You just keep pressing the envelope of what can be done. So the fact that you are partnered with the Virginia Tech Think Lab, the fact that the College of Science at George Mason University is actually your partner in this conference. The whole idea that there are evidence-based, data-supported models of remediation and education is not necessarily it's not what's coming out of the education space, but it's actually, to me, it's very interesting that this is coming out of the College of Science.
Right. I'm sorry.
No, how did you partner up with them? So how did you partner up with them?
Well, like all great things, through a mutual friend, somebody who's on their board of directors, who I happen to be friends with, introduced me to the director of marketing and communications for the College of Science. And like every great thing, it started with a whiteboard session, just sort of saying, okay, how can we work together to really get these kids engaged and on the pathway and getting and being successful. And so the Dyslexic Edge was born out of that. And we are continue to be so grateful for that partnership, because I think it takes, you mentioned earlier about how we're all kind of talking about issues of equity right now. And one of the things that I really like to stress with that is it takes all of us from all different walks of life to lift up a group, right? So, it's sort of the natural default to say, well, I'm in education, I'll work with the College of Education. Well, why? I mean, I think they're also an incredibly important partner in this, of course, but everybody has to be invested. Everybody. Otherwise this doesn't work. Otherwise you continue to create the echo chambers. And so I'm very proud of the fact that we as an organization are really branching out and trying to connect with people who seem like, gee, how did that connection happen? So
it really is. It's relationships, and a lot of times sparks happen when you put two people in the same room who have a common goal or a common ideal of what they're trying to do. To me, looking down the road, I see that working with companies to invest in workforce development at younger ages is not something that is obvious. In fact, quite the opposite. As you point out, it's like, well, we have internships, or we have programs for high school students or college students, but the fact of the matter is the investment has to be pushed down further. And companies who have to grow their own talent to your point about Science Saturdays, you have to show students the possibilities because, a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, what do you know when you're in second grade or third grade about what the jobs, even in middle school, what the jobs are? And so you're not necessarily developing your own plan for how to get someplace if you can't see what it is. And I think that's another equity piece too, that, I think it was maybe Barack Obama who used to be Take Your Daughters to Work Day, and then it became Take Your Child to Work Day. And I think at some point during his years in office, he's like, take somebody else's child to work. Because the problem is that your child sees what they know, whatever end of the spectrum that is on, whether your dad works at McDonald's or your dad works for Booz Allen Hamilton, that's what you know. We should be taking other people's children to work because, and if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so young children just don't understand what the options are, and therefore they don't have a roadmap. And we are not growing our own talent. Clearly, we're not growing our own talent.
No, and you're absolutely right.
And to me, it's kind of a failure of imagination.
Well, it is. And that's why, like I said, I think it's important to get multiple partners from multiple avenues and different, even things that seem disparate, right? Like, why would you partner with that or whatever? Because it's also the way we conceptualize STEM, right? Like, and STEM is also a way of thinking, right? So even if these kids don't necessarily become scientists or engineers, when you think of STEM as a meta discipline that sort of teaches a way of thinking and a way of looking at the world, of being critical and to examine and to think, it's a benefit to them regardless of what field they go into. And I couldn't agree more that showing these students where they can go is so important. But one of the things too, when we talk about workforce development and you're saying these kids seeing the pathway, one of the things we do for them too is we make them citizen scientists at a very young age. And the reason is because the jobs they're going to have don't exist yet, right? We are in a world that is innovating so quickly, right? That the days of I'm going to be a firefighter or I'm going to be a teacher, whatever, that's not the question we should be asking. We should be saying to these kids, what problem do you see and what do you want to solve? And so part of our curriculum is actually working on, occasionally we do citizen science projects where they collect real, you can actually, there's many apps out there that ask students to collect real world data for real scientists. And so we start to empower them very early on to say, you can be part of this scientific conversation now, right? You can start solving problems now.
You say that and it immediately makes me think of the irrepressible Greta Thunberg, who has led a climate movement among young people when she is in fact a very young person herself, who also has learning differences. And she has not let that stop her. She has traveled all over the world. She's an intelligent, super intelligent girl. And, I hope young people look at that and realize that learning differences and your age and where you live in the world doesn't really matter when you're passionate about what it is you want to do.
Right. And one of the things that, Greta's a great example because not only is, like you said, it doesn't matter what her age or her learning differences are. She's out there just really making a difference. But one of the things I find empowering about her is that she owns who she is. And that's something we teach these students is we don't say you're intelligent, but by the way, I have dyslexia. It's like, no, I have dyslexia. And that is a superpower in and of itself that makes me capable of doing things that other people aren't necessarily. And so Greta does, she's just such a remarkable young lady who certainly has risen as an example of owning who you are and taking pride in it.
Well, there's not enough time on the show to talk about perhaps some of the broken aspects of our education system and the fact that, parents often care about how their children are achieving in school because achieving in school is the hurdle you have to get over to get to the next thing or the next place or the next program that you want your child to be in. And you look at Greta Thunberg, and you know, Malala too. And one of the remarkable things about both those young women were the support from their parents, the support from their dads, who said, go out and own your message and be the person, because I'm standing behind here saying, yes, it's the right thing, and yes, I support you. And I think it's very difficult in the system that we're in now for parents to get out of this. Everything is measured, everything is marked. There are so many barriers if you can't get past this thing to get your child onto the next thing that is required to get onto the next thing.
Right. And I think that's, yeah, it's it's interesting you talk about that, because, Northern Virginia, we talked earlier about how hard it is for parents. You were talking about to watch your child, watch them just become less and less confident, lose self-esteem. And I will tell you that seems to have a sort of a double hit here in the area we live. I mean, there's so much tied to achievement here in Northern Virginia. And it becomes, we forget, what we try to tell our parents is that happiness is sort of the primary goal, confidence and happiness. And one of the greatest gifts for us as a family is we completely re-baselined our values when this happened. And I consider that to be an amazing gift, because, we were caught up in all of that, and it's the A's and top of the class and, how many things can we add to the resume kind of thing, until this all happened. And it made us realize that what matters most is our child's happiness, and making sure that she's confident and happy and able to pick the pathway that makes her the most successful, because it's what she wants to do. And that to me is the ultimate goal as a parent.
I can't think of a better closing thought than that one right there, which is to keep the perspective. It's a long game. Thank you so much, Krista, for being here on the show. For all of you listening, you have been listening to Making Change Radio, which is every Thursday night at 9 p.m. For more information about what we discussed tonight, the programs, the conference, you can find at www.sdsquared.org. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll hear you next Thursday night.